Welcome in the podcast On the Brink on this Thursday morning, fresh off of Indiana's 76-74 win over St. John's at Simon Skjodt Assembly Hall in the Gavitt Tipoff Games. A thrilling win for Indiana, really a tale of two halves. And to break it all down, I'm joined on this week's episode by Ryan Corazza, my co-founder at Inside the Hall, author of The Minute After, and author of Film Session. Ryan, welcome back to the show.
Hello, Alex. Happy to be here. I think I'm awake enough for this on this early morning podcast for the two of us here, but we're going to make it through.
Yeah, it was obviously a good night for Indiana because any win, in my opinion, is a good win, particularly this early in the tenure for Mike Woodson, who's trying to implement a new system, integrating a lot of new players. And Indiana, I kind of want to take this game piece by piece with you, Ryan. And it, to me, seemed like last night Indiana was really ready to play from the opening tip. They came out ready for the pressure that St. John's applied. I think in the first half they only had 7 turnovers. I was impressed with just their poise and handling the pressure. And overall, I thought the first half was just a really strong 20 minutes of basketball for Indiana, although it did feel like, and you may have mentioned this in the minute after, it did feel like Indiana missed some opportunities to extend the lead out a little bit more than it could have in the first half.
Yeah, it definitely felt like one of those halves where they were dominant, but the 12-point lead felt like it could have been more. I think there was some points left sort of on the cutting room floor. I think free throw wise, they could have been a little bit sharper. A couple more shots could have went in, but I mean, I think through 3 games, it's apparent. Mike Woodson had mentioned this many times in the offseason, and it's really shown on the court so far that just Indiana sort of being ahead of the game defensively and still working things out on the offensive end. But just in terms of ball pressure and switching and communication and just really getting up into the other team, the first half was really impressive. There were 7 steals. I did actually watch back each steal at halftime, and there were a couple plays where St. John's just simply kind of just dribbled it off their foot, which I don't know if you can always account to the defense. Potentially the pressure maybe was getting them a bit, but there were just a couple of miscues on St. John's ends. But there were some. That Trey Galloway steal was pretty nifty, but he ended up getting the flagrant foul on. Race Thompson had another steal where he looked like there was no way that he was going to be able to get that steal, and that's why St. John's made the pass, and all of a sudden he just jumped out to the perimeter, got that, and I think that was the one that he dunked home. So just that kind of level of effort and just kind of almost being crafty in how they got a couple of those steals that led to points was really impressive.
Yeah, the balance I thought too was impressive offensively in the first half. If you look at the box score, I mean, Race Thompson had 9 points in the first half. Tamar Bates actually came off the bench and had 11. That led Indiana in scoring in the first half. But 6 different guys score. They scored 10 points off of turnovers in the first half, 11 fast break points. As I mentioned, only 7 turnovers. I thought that was pretty good given the pressure that St. John's applied. Were you surprised at all just how easy Indiana made it look in terms of getting through the pressure that St. John's applied in the first half and just how efficient they were offensively over the first 20 minutes?
Yes and no. I think, that was kind of the narrative heading into this one, just how they were going to handle it. And I definitely in that first half, I thought it did well. But at the same time, I think because, Indiana was able to only allow them to make 9 shots, it didn't provide an environment for St. John's to be able to set up the press play after play after play, because St. John's simply didn't shoot it well and didn't score a ton. So Indiana kind of made it so that they didn't have to maybe face that press as much as one would have expected heading into this game. And I think that helped as well. It was sort of a dual they did pretty well against it when it was there, but they also didn't have to face it as much because of Indiana sort of imposing their will, right? It was, here comes this pressure defense, full court press, but Indiana flipped that on its head, and they were actually like the defensive aggressor in the first half, which I think was helpful as well.
Trayce Jackson-Davis, obviously another really good game for him, but I thought he was really good in the first half, just overall. 8 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 1 block shot, 17 minutes. I'm just curious, just for your early season thoughts on Trayce and his how he's kind of carrying himself out there. I mean, one thing I've kind of been thinking about and observing. I think I asked him maybe prior to the St. John's game when he met with us for availability. To me, he's always been a good offensive player, and there's been criticisms of him in the past in terms of maybe not being the best at finishing through contact and having some trouble with more physical defenders in the Big Ten. But where I've really noticed a difference, and I'm not saying that he's not better offensively this year, because he's shown that he can step out, and last night he did it. He stepped out and made a long 2 early in the game that he wasn't taking that shot last year. But the one thing I'm seeing differently, it just seems like he's playing a lot harder defensively. Do you see that too? And how do you think long-term that can impact Indiana's defense as a team, to have a guy with his size and his mobility in the paint really working? To me, it seems harder to affect shots and rebounding. I mean, I know the rebounding as a team wasn't great in the second half last night, but overall, I feel like Trayce has been much more aggressive on the rebounding front this season as well.
Yeah, well, there's certainly, I think it was during Woodson's availability or on Tuesday, rather, before the St. John's game. I think it was him that was talking about how they're really, in essence, almost fun. Not so much that they're wanting players to get to the rim against them, but when that does happen, that I think they're using this term like this launching pad, where Trayce Jackson-Davis is just kind of free, and they're wanting him to leave the weak side to try and block shots. And it seems like it's a large point of emphasis that he is the rim protector, right? And that's sort of his role on this team in terms of if there's a defensive breakdown or just if anybody's getting to the rim. And I mean, I know it was Northern, but to get 6 blocks in the first half and then 7 total blocks. And I mean, some of those were just kind of a man amongst boys type situation. And I think Zach Osterman of Indy Star that mentioned this in the first half yesterday, that again, it was very apparent that the defense, when it needed to, was Trayce again as players were coming to the rim. That was sort of his role. So it's almost having this defined role, and sort of, as you said too, in terms of just how hard he's playing. I think, he has mentioned that Mike Woodson has sort of told him, no, you can even play harder than you thought you think you can play. And that's sort of raised his effort level. So that's just kind of another piece of the puzzle here too, that I think, he's always had a good motor, but I think maybe mentally he's gotten down, or when things haven't gone Indiana's way, it's affected him somewhat. But there seems to be a little bit more of like a consistent high level on both ends of the floor for him as well, which has, he was already a great player. And I think sort of around the margins now in defensive effort and expanding his offensive game and just having his effort level a little bit higher has really, that's what you see different in him this year so far.
Yeah, and we always hear, like in the preseason, guys talk about, I'm going to expand my game, I'm going to do this. Where with him this year, I feel like he's actually done that a little bit in terms of actually taking some shots from the perimeter. I mean, Race Thompson maybe overdid it a little bit the first couple of games and taking threes, but Trayce, I think's done a pretty good job when he has the opening there to take that shot. Do you see that as something that's sustainable for him and over the course of this season for Indiana, for him to take those kind of shots, and how do you think that can impact Indiana offensively if they have a guy that's capable of being not only a scorer down in the post, but also stretching the floor? Because it really seemed like, from what Woodson said in the preseason, to kind of implement the style that he wants to play offensively, he needs to have Trayce Jackson-Davis and Race Thompson be able to make shots away from the basket in order to not clog up the lane like we saw time and time again the last couple seasons under Archie Miller.
Yeah, in terms of sustainability of it, I think that I feel like there will be a sustainability in the confidence of Indiana at large shooting, and I think specifically of Trayce Jackson-Davis, because there's more of an empowerment. There's more of a, if you're open, shoot mentality with the staff and with this team. And honestly, I think that can go a long way to helping actually with makes. If you're in the game, you get the ball, the shot's open, and you just have the confidence, and everyone on the staff has given you that confidence or has given you that green light. I think there's less thinking and more playing in an environment like that. And I think that can suit Trayce Jackson-Davis well, because I think he's already a confident player. And he's got kind of an array of offensive moves. And honestly, he's spoken to it already this season in terms of, look, I'm taking what the defense gives me. So if I'm going to be played to have an open, 17-footer, that's there. I'm going to take it. I have confidence in the shot. I've worked on it. Right. So, I'm not sure he's going to be like Kevin Durant in the mid-range, shooting 60% or anything like that. However, I do think it allows Indiana to be more versatile offensively. And if he's going to get that shot and he can make it, then teams are going to have to guard that, which can, open things up more, or he just has more opportunities down low, because that's not a strategy that a team can kind of employ to kind of kick him off the post and make him a shooter if he's going to be able to make them.
Homefield produces the world's most comfortable, premium licensed collegiate apparel out of its headquarters in Indianapolis. Run by IU grads, Homefield studies Indiana's history to come up with the most unique apparel designs available for Hoosier fans anywhere. Our current favorite at Podcast on the Brink is the 1987 National Champs t-shirt commemorating IU's last national championship at the Superdome in New Orleans. And it's not just Indiana apparel available at Homefield. They're constantly adding new schools to the over 120 currently available at homefieldapparel.com. With the holidays just around the corner, now is the time to beat the rush, and Podcast on the Brink listeners can save 15% off of your first purchase at Homefield. Use the code BRINK15 at checkout to save 15% off of your first purchase at homefieldapparel.com. I want to dig into the second half in a little bit here, but before we get there, I want to just ask you about two guys that I asked Mike Woodson about before the game, and both of them struggled over the first two games. One of them came through last night and had, I think, a really strong second half offensively. Miller Kopp finishes with 12 points. I think 7 of those came in the second half. And Parker Stewart, who, came out that first game of the season and made a couple 3-pointers, I think, in the first 2 or 3 minutes, and really since then hasn't done all that much. I think he made 1 3 last night, but only took 3 shots, played 23 minutes. What have you seen so far just out of Kopp and Stewart? And I mean, Stewart to me is a little bit confusing as to why maybe he's not getting more looks offensively, in that, he was brought here specifically to take 3-point shots, and for him to only take 3 shots last night was a little bit surprising to me, given kind of the openness of the game and the up and down tempo. Do you see any adjustments, I guess, that need to be made with either of those guys, and kind of what's your thoughts on both so far through 3 games?
Yeah, it's been, I don't know if puzzling is the right term, but they sort of stick out to me, and probably Kopp more than Stewart, in terms of just the effort and energy and sort of the flow and the connectedness of this Indiana team, they just sort of are sticking out as not being almost cohesive with that. I think Kopp, I know that he's sort of working back from an ankle injury, and sometimes we forget that a couple of these players have not been in the system, program, or on campus for very long. But yeah, he just seems to be a little bit of maybe like a step slow. And I think, last night he was, I think went to the bench. You might need to remind me of this, but went to the bench pretty early in the first half, I think after a defensive miscue or two, but then he was able to come back in. He, blocked a shot, later in the first half, and some of the decision making almost is interesting for him at times too, because I feel like in the second half he got the ball in the right corner and he had space to shoot and he didn't take that shot, and then he ended up like driving in and hitting that like really tough runner. And it almost reminds me of against Eastern Michigan. He got the ball in the left corner. I think it was I don't remember which half it was, maybe the first half, and he kind of double clutched, and then I think he ended up shooting after that and missing the shot. And it's kind of like, well, if we're gonna kind of hem and haw, shoot, not shoot, and then get the shot up, those don't tend to fall as much as if you just catch in rhythm and shoot. So he just seems a little I don't know if unsure or just kind of not in the flow of things so far. And Parker Stewart has, early in games, I think last night, when Trace got double teamed early, he was able to kick out to Parker Stewart for a 3-pointer after he got double teamed. Am I remembering that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Or was that? Yeah, I think that was Parker Stewart. And as you said, similarly, against Eastern Michigan, Parker Stewart too, to me, seems a little, again, when there's sort of this, a lot of guys on the team are, even we've noticed, although it wasn't the best game for Rob Finney last night, but just sort of more demonstrative energy, more kind of hyped up energy. Parker Stewart seems, and I don't know if that's just his personality, but again, similar to Kopp, there's like a kind of a vibration. He's like he's not vibrating. The frequency is not vibrating on as high as everybody else right now. And I think he's almost like not creating his own opportunities in some sense with that, and has just been playing off of other guys on offense. And if he's open, that's about all that he's contributed offensively, is just like an open shooter early in games right now. So I think they're both starting because they have experience. They're a little bit older. But as you saw last night, Tamar Bates coming in, and actually Tyler had tweeted before the game that it really looked like Bates was locked in the pregame, and he came out and was really focused and hit some big shots in the first half. So they're starting for now, and maybe it's just a slow start here, but there may be some players that later in the season Mike Woodson kind of can't deny to get in there, maybe ahead of either of those two if they keep going on like this.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned starting for now, because that's kind of what I was going to follow up with and ask you. With Kopp and Stewart struggles so far, obviously it's just it's a very small sample size, but you have Tamar Bates really emerging as a guy off the bench that can bring a lot of energy and give you some offense. And Jordan Geronimo was great last night in the second half. Is there an argument to be made, though, that Stewart and Kopp just kind of remain in those roles because Mike Woodson wants to have that balance with the guys coming off the bench that can kind of bring in that energy and bring in that second unit? Same thing with Rob Finney, who at times this season has played really well. In the first couple games, I thought he was good, and then last night didn't play as well as we've seen. But if Indiana is going to use its bench as effectively as it did last night, there's an argument to me, at least, to kind of have those younger energy guys coming in and being able to lead the second unit, as opposed to, bringing Kopp or Stewart, who really haven't necessarily gotten into the flow of things off the bench. If you're gonna play 9 or 10 guys consistently, I think you want to have kind of some balance between your first and second units.
No, I think that's a great point, and sometimes there's like too much of an emphasis on who starts games and for how much time they're actually getting, and it, sort of the cliche of like, well, it's not who you start with, it's who you finish with, right? So, I do agree, because I think so far Rob has been really great in that 6-man role and coming off the bench and providing energy, and I mean, same goes for Jordan Geronimo. I think that obviously he's this very early in his second season, but I think the growth that he's shown, how he plays, the energy he plays with, and the fact that, I mean, I think, Jared has mentioned he feels like of the assembly call, he's mentioned that he feels like Geronimo has like the third best shooting form on the team. And I'm not, there's almost not a lot to argue with on that right now, because his shot looks great. He plays with great energy. He's athletic as all hell. So it's one of those situations where, you could maybe, if he continues on this trajectory, it's like, oh, well, he should start because he's doing X, Y, and Z. But for him to be able to come off the bench and provide that is really important to having a good balanced, starting, or a good balance between what your bench can bring and what your starters can provide, right? Because I think Indiana, maybe in some years past, has gotten into a situation, or just in general on a basketball team, if you have to ride your starters that hard and that long, and when you go to the bench, it's a little iffy, or you can't have confidence in the bench. It's one of those situations where it's a nice luxury to have, and I think Jordan Geronimo and Finney, to an extent as well so far, have really been like spark plugs off the bench, and that's really important for a rotation.
Getting to the second half, I know we talked a little bit before this morning that you dug into what happened in order for Indiana to give up that lead. They ultimately are able to hang on, but there was a lot going on in that second half. There was the Xavier Johnson foul trouble. There was Rob Finney playing a little bit early in the second half and then being summoned to the bench and never getting back in. There was Christianlander making an appearance. I've been getting a lot of questions about why isn't Christianlander getting an opportunity? And, he came in last night and I thought did some good things, but he also had 3 fouls, I think, in the first 3 minutes he played. There was Jordan Geronimo, giving Indiana a huge boost when they really needed it there. I think just inside, the 10-minute mark of the second half to kind of push that. I think it got tied at 56, and then Geronimo hits a 3 and Lander hits a layup, and that kind of pushed the lead back out to 5. And then there's obviously Champagne from St. John's just kind of going on a ridiculous shooting display. And I think when we watch the film of that game back, you'll realize that Indiana really defensively didn't do that bad of a job. He's just a really good player and made some incredibly tough shots, but also the pressure, I think, got to Indiana as well. More turnovers in the second half. Didn't do a great job rebounding wise. What, when you went back and kind of looked at some things, what stood out as major differences from a really good first half where Indiana, I think, could have easily been up 15, 20 points at halftime. They settled for, I think, a 12-point lead, and a second half where they were basically holding on and trying to just kind of get out of there with a win late. Yeah, so I think one of the things that stood out, and this is a team in St. John's that, is much better than a Eastern Michigan and a Northern Illinois, is they made shots, right? And that can go a long way to getting you back in a game or making Indiana's defense maybe not seem or appear as good as it was in the first half or has been so far this season. I think looking back at sort of that 10-minute stretch sort of leading up to when Xavier Johnson got his 4th foul, I think that was like the 12-something minute mark. There were a number of tough shots that St. John's hit. There was just a really quick ball screen on the left wing. They just quickly got over it, hit a 3-pointer. Indiana defended well for almost a whole possession, and someone in St. John's just drove from like the left wing all the way through the paint,
to the other side of the rim. Xavier Johnson strongly contesting the shot, and he threw it high up off the glass and it went in. So they definitely hit some tough shots, and as you said, Champagne. Obviously just hit shots as well and on his way to game high 32 points. But that said, Indiana also had some more breakdowns and sort of things we've seen in years past from Indiana just off the perimeter. I think that's a big reason that Mike Woodson did not put Rob Finney back in the game. There were back-to-back possessions where he just got beat off the perimeter. Indiana sort of olayed defense behind him, and they were able to, that was a quick, I think 4 points for St. John's. They made most of those buckets. One of them might have, I don't think it was an and one. I think they just made two shots at the bucket there. And then in terms of handling the pressure, it was interesting watching back as well in terms of it wasn't always in the full court pressure where they were turning the ball, coughing the ball up in the half court, in the back court or anything like that. It was more when they seemingly broke the press, but then when they tried to sort of get into the half court offense, because St. John's was still there was still some pressure, and some of it was just sort of floor spacing for Indiana. Like one play that stuck out to me was Indiana got the ball into Trace Jackson Davis, but because it was still very early, right when they broke the press, the spacing was there. Like Race Thompson was also in the paint, and Tamar Bates was trying to come through the lane and like clear out to the right corner. But because Race and Tamar were like in the paint when Trace got the ball, there was a lot of defense just by happenstance around him, and a bigger player in St. John's, I forget who, number one, I forget exactly who that was guarding the ball, which was Rob Finney. So all of a sudden when the St. John's player went down to double team Trace Jackson Davis, it was a much larger player than Trace Jackson Davis was expecting to double team. There's all of this mess in the paint of other players, and you could tell Trace Jackson Davis looked across to the right wing to pass out for a three-pointer on the opposite side of the floor where he was. But he telegraphed that, and there was all this defense around him, and like that was the turnover, right? So it was almost that right after they got into the onto their side of the court that things sort of were still a little sketchy, a little shifty on where things were and how things were set up. And I feel like that's where more of the bulk of the turnovers came, just sort of right after they got it over half court, than it was okay, we're in the back court, we coughed up the ball there.
Yeah, I mean, two other things that Indiana, just basic things. Well, I guess one of them is basic and one of them is not so basic, as we've seen over the last 4 seasons. 3-point shooting, they go 6 of 18, 33.3%. That it's okay. It's not as bad as what we've seen in previous seasons, but I've kind of said Indiana needs to become an average 3-point shooting team, and it can really have a major impact. They knock a couple more shots in, and I think they got some pretty good looks last night that just didn't go down. It's obviously a different feeling of the game, but more importantly, the free throw shooting continues to be perplexing. 10 of 19 from the free throw line, and really down the stretch, there was a lot of I think there was front ends of 1-on-ones perhaps missed. I'd have to go back and look at the box score. There was also just, down the stretch, I think Xavier Johnson missed a free throw and at the end there that could have made it a 3-point game. And then all of a sudden, St. John's last possession, even if they do knock in that shot, it's only going to overtime. So to me, those are just kind of two areas where I look at this team and say, as impressive as the start has been through 3 games, and I think there's a lot of good things that you can look at with Indiana and feel good about if you're an IU fan. I also feel like Indiana has to get better in both of those areas if they really want to be the team that they aspire to be this year.
Yeah, the free throw shooting to me sticks out as the sort of most problematic area I think so far this season, because it's been a problem for this program for the last several years. And while some things have changed and there's some noticeable differences in terms of the new regime, and now I think free throw shooting continues to remain a puzzling problem for this team. And I have no answers in terms of the fix for that. And who knows, we'll see as the season goes along. It's still a pretty small sample size of just 3 games here. So this might not be something that carries on through, but I just think it's been such a consistent theme and has consistently happened for the last couple of years that it's hard to break out of the thinking of it changing, perhaps. In terms of the 3-point shooting, and you spoke to it there, and I think it's very true. If this team can just sort of be average, and they're able to convert more at the line, get to the line and convert at the line, if their defense continues to be strong and they have the balanced attack and they have an All-American and Trace Jackson Davis, those things can sort of accentuate or I guess sort of make up for the lack of elite 3-point shooting. That said, I do feel like, and look, it happened in the Archie Miller era enough times too. There are also going to be games where it's not like every game Indiana is just going to be shooting 33%, 32, 34% from 3-point range. I think there are going to be games when, if you look at the mix of a Parker Stewart, of a Miller Kopp, of a Tamar Bates, of, Rob Finney, a Jordan Geronimo, right? He's a 3-point shooter. Race Thompson might, hit some more, and all of a sudden they shoot, 40% one game, and that might make up for another poor night at the free throw line, or they're playing a team that just is better and the defense isn't as suffocating because this team they're playing hits good shots. So I'm not, I think the average 3-point shooting means that there are going to be nights, if this holds, that they'll be above the average mark. Although, to counter that, there will be nights when they will probably be shooting under it as well. So a little too early on both of those metrics in terms of the 3-point shooting and the free throw shooting. But I guess nothing overly encouraging so far from either of those spots.
What did you make of the minutes that Indiana got from Christianlander? I think he played 6 minutes, and we kind of joke about this when we talk during the games, just about Lander in general, because I think because he's a 5-star recruit, people are just so interested in like why he's not playing. But I think you kind of saw last night a player who's still very, very early in his development. I mean, this is supposed to be his freshman year of college. He's, got more experienced guys in front of him. And I do think if he stays the course and continues to kind of understand that he has a long way to go as a player, there's a lot of talent in there that can eventually be a really good player. But defensively, we saw, the first couple times he tried to play defense last night, he got kind of exposed and had to foul to kind of stay in the right position. And then we kind of saw, him also show why he was such a coveted prospect. He had that play in transition where he makes that tough bucket at the rim, and he also had an assist on the Jordan Geronimo 3-pointer. So a bit of a mixed bag for me, but I think Lander kind of answered some of the questions of maybe why he's not playing more, but also showed some glimpses last night of if he does kind of keep working at it and continues to embrace getting better, that he can eventually become a really productive player in Bloomington.
Yeah, to kind of zoom out and talk about the big picture Christianlander narrative and people kind of being really interested in him, and I don't know if a hot button issue we could call that, but the reality is, he's 5-star. He came in early, and I think there was a lot of excitement and hype surrounding him. But I think the expectations did not match the reality in terms of, I think, things like speed of the college game. I think his size, I think his defensive ability. I mean, he did not shoot well at all last year too. So, his level of play was just frankly not high enough to warrant those minutes, or maybe just his overall play was just not what people were expecting. But so there's still, I think, that tension between what people expected versus the reality of his game. But I do think, and it's just so early this season, but the interesting thing about last night was, I think under Archie Miller, I'm not sure if there was a lot of confidence instilled in Christianlander. I think that he was kind of came in sporadically, and even games when he maybe did show something or there were some positives, there wasn't sort of that reinforcement the next game of the minutes, and it was just sort of a roller coaster. There wasn't much consistency or frankly any rhyme or reason to some of the minutes he got last year, where I think last night frankly, even going back to the NAU game, the fact that they were able to build that lead big enough, and for him to come hit when him and Leo came in and they played hard, they got after it. There's no pouting. Oh, I'm only playing the last couple of minutes of kind of garbage time of this game. They came in with intent. And I think last night was a great learning experience and confidence building position for Christianlander to come to that game last night, more so than at any point he got into a game last season, because Xavier Johnson's out with 4 fouls. Mike Woodson and the staff say, Rob Finney got beat twice in a row. We have high defensive standards. I'm not putting him back in the game. Trey Galloway, who has frankly been playing point guard over Christianlander so far this season, has a wrist injury that they're looking into. So he's got one option when the game is kind of hanging in the balance, right? And Christianlander comes in. He doesn't turn the ball over once. Excuse me here. In the 6+ minutes he's in the game. And as you said, he hits that big shot, which was at a key point, and he just kind of steadied the ship. Yes, he's still learning defensively, and I think to your point, you're right. Like, he often fouls because he just gets beat, and some people are complaining, oh, he should have had 0 fouls. None of those were actually fouls, but I think that just kind of the refs can, I think, sniff him out pretty easily with when he gets beat, what he tries to do. And it's sometimes pretty obvious. So yeah, it's really, I think the staff just continues to, as they do with all these players, next man up, you're going to get your turn, and we're going to continue to give you confidence. You're an important part of this program, even if you aren't getting minutes. And I think all of that combined with, his work, the work that he's clearly continuing to put in, lets him have the opportunity to, I don't know, shine is the right word, but be what they needed in that spot. And it was a huge part of the game to not, that lead that could have flipped so easily last night, because it became tied at one point when he was in the game, and him and Geronimo were able to keep distance and build back the lead. And I thought that was like a huge part of the game and a really important step in the growth and trajectory of his career.
The last thing before we get out of here, Ryan, I'm just curious, both of us have watched a lot of IU basketball going back to, when you were a student at IU covering the team. And then since 2007, we've been pretty much writing about every game, every season. And it seems like there's been points in time since we've been doing this that there's been a lot of optimism for IU basketball, and it really just never, there was never any sustained momentum. And it's easy to fall, there's a lot of great things I think Mike Woodson's done so far, and I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic about the future. But watching that game last night, it just felt a little different in terms of the excitement maybe, and the atmosphere in the building. I wasn't there, but under Archie Miller, Indiana, it was almost like, they'd take one step forward and then they take 2 steps back. I mean, they had some impressive wins in non-conference play at times, and then really could never get over the hump. But there's just something different, I feel like, with Mike Woodson so far. I don't know if it's the confidence that he's instilled in the players. I don't know if it's just his demeanor, his calming presence on the sideline, and just kind of, I mean, if you watch him coach, he's just kind of standing over there with his arms crossed, and he's obviously barking out instructions, but it never seems like he panics at all. I mean, he's pretty much even keel, and the way he kind of conducts himself, and that's different from what we saw with Tom Crean, who kind of paced up and down the sidelines at all times, and Archie Miller, who was throwing his gum or whatever, and slamming his hand on the scorer's table and just yelling constantly. I mean, just big picture. I mean, how are you looking at Indiana's kind of future here this season under Mike Woodson, and what have your impressions been of just watching his team play so far, and the differences of maybe than what we've seen from Indiana teams in the past?
He's a different guy than the last two personalities that have been the coaches at the school, and so I think in some sense just the difference of that is for the fans has been maybe they didn't realize they needed that, but I think that's been a welcome change. And the way Mike Woodson has talked about just coming in and basically bringing Indiana back to like national title relevance, and like the almost certainly the confidence he has talking with it, but almost the expectation of that. Like, he's like, of course, this is what we're doing here. Right. And this moment is not too big for Mike Woodson. This job is not too big for Mike Woodson. He's not stepping up from a Dayton or a Marquette and taking the almighty Indiana head basketball coaching job. This is a home for Mike Woodson, obviously, but he has been on a much bigger stage than this. And so I think just his confidence and he's a people person too, right? And I think some of the criticism of the Archie Miller era was, outside of coaching these players, how much was he connecting with them outside of that, right? How open was the program? I think under the last two coaches, there's been more of a closed door. And I think as soon as Woodson came in, he's been, more happy to do some press availability. But on top of that, the way that the program is using social media, what they're showing of these players, how much access they're giving to these players, I think it's just a really different, it's more of an open door than a closed door, just in terms of access as well. But to kind of just go back to the on-court stuff, it's style of play and confidence that I think is really the biggest difference. And I think the fans, again, we've been in an assembly hall kind of times. I don't go nearly as much as I used to, right? But when you think of just sort of more up-tempo, quicker play, quick shots, quick buckets, great defensive plays, that stuff feeds off for the team. Defense and offense can, it's kind of a feedback loop, but I think for the fans as well, where, in the Archie Miller era, pack line is more, I shouldn't say it's a passive defense, but it's like packing it in. It's like not letting the offense in, where with Mike Woodson getting more up into players, I think can create a little bit more to cheer about, and make some plays that are more exciting, more or less. And I think that the fans are noticing that. And it seemed like last night it was a really raucous environment, and they've been able to hold serve at home, which was not the case under in the Archie Miller regime. So I don't know. It's a big picture question I sort of went all over with, but I think ultimately his quiet confidence at the helm and bleeding that into the whole team has been the biggest noticeable difference so far. And I think that's a better foundation to build from going forward, almost no matter how much this works out the rest of the season.
Absolutely. A lot of good points there, Ryan. Indiana now has a bit of a lull in its schedule. They host, I think, Louisiana on Sunday, play Jackson State on Tuesday. So quick turnaround there before hosting Marshall, I think, the following weekend. And then things will get a little bit more interesting at that point with the Big Ten ACC Challenge, a couple of Big Ten games sprinkled in there. We will, of course, have it all covered for you at Inside the Hall, podcast on the brink. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, thanks everybody for listening. Thank you, Ryan, for the time this morning, and talk to you all again next week on another episode of Podcast on the Brink.